Welcome to episode 32 of The Pulpiteer. I'm your host, Eric Hepburn, and I'm glad to have you join us for today's episode. Today's podcast is entitled Magical Negroes. This week is a live recording, and it is inspired and named for the new movie available on Amazon, The American Society of Magical Negroes, which is in turn inspired by the coin termed by Spike Lee in a 2001 college speaking tour. But we'll get to all that. I'm honored to be joined this week by Kenneth Witherspoon, whose chosen name is Mr. Spoon. He is my co-conspirator in presenting this colloquy on race, and also deserves the lion's share of the credit for the overall theme and program of the service. I'm also grateful to Mel Moss for his reading of the article about Spike Lee's origination of the term. So let's get started. Good morning. I'm Eric Hepburn, your pulpiteer. My pronouns are he, him. I'm honored to co-lead today's service with my conspirator, Kenneth Spoon Witherspoon, known around here affectionately as Mr. Spoon. We hope to model for you today a colloquy on race through the lens of the magical Negro. The spirit of the colloquy is an open dialogue, one that holds space for courage and vulnerability, one where participants hold that space for one another with the aim of deeply hearing, acknowledging, and understanding the other person and the truth of their experiences. I am not the representative of all white people in this exchange, nor is Mr. Spoon the representative of all black people. We are simply two earnest seekers for truth and relationship who have agreed to be in colloquy together. So instead of our usual Soul Matters sermon on this month's topic of inclusion, we will be practicing it with each other instead. Would you like to say a few words of introduction?
Good morning. Thank you for coming to this first Sunday in Black History Month. I hope that after Eric and our service, that you may approach it in a different manner, but I shall leave that up to you and your reaction. Thank you.
I invite you now into a place of deeper stillness and reflection with these adapted excerpts from an article in the Yale Bulletin about the 2001 college speaking tour of film director Spike Lee, who coined the term magical Negro. A new phenomenon has emerged in film in recent years in which an African American character is imbued with special powers. But this new image is just a reincarnation of the same old stereotypes or caricatures of African Americans as noble savage or the happy slave that has been presented in film and on television for decades. Lee cited 4 recent films in which there is a magical, mystical Negro character: The Family Man, What Dreams May Come, The Legend of Bagger Vance, and The Green Mile. In the latter film, Lee noted a black inmate cures a prison guard of disease simply by touching him. In The Legend of Bagger Vance, a black man with all of these powers teaches a young white man, played by actor Matt Damon, how to golf like a champion. How is it that black people have these powers, but they use them for the benefit of white people? The Legend of Bagger Vance takes place in a Depression-era Georgia, a time when lynching of blacks in the South was commonplace, Lee stated, incredulously. Blacks are getting lynched left and right, and Bagger Vance is more concerned about improving Matt Damon's golf swing. I gotta sit down. I get mad just thinking about it, continued Lee. They're still doing the same old thing, recycling the noble savage and the happy slave. Lee said his latest film, Bamboozled, was a controversial satire dramatizing the popularity of a modern black minstrel show, deals precisely with such misrepresentations of African Americans. It's about how film and television have been used to denigrate certain groups of people, commented the director. It's about the power of images and how they hurt.
What does it mean to bear faithful witness? As I said earlier in the introduction about the definition of colloquy, part of what it means is to show up with a willingness to hold space for the story of another in your own heart. I also mentioned, but it bears repeating, that spiritual maturity is the ability to hold paradoxes deeply. So, I am not the representative of all white men, but I am a white man. Mr. Spoon is not the representative of all black men, but he too is a black man. We are both unique and amazing and weird and wonderful creatures in our own way. And we are united by a common humanity whose depths cannot be undercounted. So we are deeply different and deeply the same at the same time. It is our intention that you will hear things today that will make you uncomfortable. You will begin to think about how these things reflect on you and your behavior. That is not an inappropriate reaction. But what I want to invite you to do is not to get up in your own head and your own reactions and your own thoughts, especially if they have the whiff of defensiveness. What I would like you to do is continue to sit with the story. You will have time to reflect on what the story means to you later. Your ability to do so will be positively impacted by your ability to take in the whole story. So try not to let your brain get in the way of hearing the story. Without further ado, my partner, Mr. Spoon.
I am an actual, real-life, magical Negro. I am the seventh son of a seventh son whose Geechee rice-eating Gila grandmother intimidated the hospital staff into taking my afterbirth for what I do not know, and I asked the older women in my family, and they said they did not ask, and she did not tell them. But the term magical Negroes is fairly recent and refers mainly to cinema and broadcast entertainment, although magical Negro have been around for a long, long time. In the late 60s, at the age of 17, I was privileged to attend Northfield Mount Hermon, and my peers and I were the children of Brown versus the Board of Education, the first generation of students to grow up in an integrated school system, and most of us, depending on which region of the country we came from. And it was a time of people of different races just learning to talk to each other, because it was recent at that point. And my comrades of color and I realized that many of our schoolmates and their relatives thought that we each had the ability to know what all black people thought about whatever racial issue they had concerns with at that moment. I tried to explain that I am not comfortable speaking for all black people. So they tried to trick me, and the questions changed from Spoon, what do black people want, to Spoon, what do you think that black people want? Which, to me, is a distinction without a difference. I was sitting in English class one day when my fellow classmates, and I was studying the poem Gunga Din, some of them reading it aloud and uncomfortably glancing surreptitiously at me as I was invoking every deity I knew of to not let me be asked to read this poem. But the reading was completed, and then the professor turned to me and said, "So Spoon, what do you think of the poem? How did it make you feel?" And 20 pairs of eyes in white faces all turned and looked in my direction. And we had discourse. At Northfield Mount Hermon, it's taught via the Socratic method. And as we talked about it, and as we pondered whether, when Gunga Din came out, there were ministers across England who stood in their pulpits and say, "How dare you say he's a better man than you are? No little brown man is better than any white man. God said so." But at that moment, I also had a visceral epiphany because I realized that almost every portrayal on television or in movies of anyone who looked like me was either Gunga Din or a fond minstrel memory of the Confederacy, which people thought were amusing or true. Sometimes it takes a real magical Negro to know one.
I'm going to use I language in this story because, as I said, this is a colloquy. And I can't speak to the internality of anyone else's experience, although certainly my wife Christy and my son Simon are deeply implicated in this story and went through it with me. And they have their own internal truths about that. But my wife and I had struggled with infertility. And as we were deciding what kind of adoption would work best for our family, we discovered that a domestic private adoption seemed like the right avenue. And as you hear, but probably often do not believe, there is racism everywhere. And in our adoption process, it will not perhaps surprise you to know that there are race check boxes in the adoption process. So you can pick which race of children you are and aren't willing to adopt. I like to frame it like this. We were sufficiently anti-racist to not check the box saying that we did not want a black child. We were not sufficiently anti-racist at that time to understand or even begin to glimpse all that that meant. I can say with some heartfelt grief, some guilt that sometimes tinges into shame, that in the early years my son was my magical Negro, my escape path from racism. I can say now that I did not understand those who at the time said that the white adoption of black children was a continuation of the legacy of slavery. I could not understand that argument at the time, but I have done my work in the intervening 16 years. And I understand that the system that made it not possible for his birth parents to be in a place to choose to parent cannot be freed from the histories and the institutions of systemic racism in this country. I can see that now, though none of it diminishes my gratitude for my son, or my love for him, or my joy that he is in my life. But here's the universal part. We all fail our children from time to time, those of us blessed with them. We all do. What my parenting failures have taught me that is relevant to today is that I can never be sure how much of my failures were racism and how many of them were free of it. You have heard the statement that privilege is about not having to worry about certain things. This is what the underside of that coin looks like. You always worry about it because you see it everywhere, but you can't pin it down. You can't say that it was 10% of this situation or 92% of this other situation or 70%, but it is never absent and it is never the whole truth. And you are left in between those insurmountable pulls, knowing that it is at least part of the story. Knowing that the racism is at least part of the story, but never knowing how much. I had no appreciation before this part of my life, what it meant to live in that kind of uncertainty all the time. But as those of you who are parents or aunts and uncles know, the things we would not do for our young are few. Our primary responsibility in life is to them, becomes to them, is about giving them every advantage we can muster, about fostering wisdom and growth and health in them. And to not know whether you are purifying the well or poisoning it is a toxicity all its own. That's a specific. The universal is like this. For those of us who have raised women, not the same, but similar. You see, across the lines of race and gender and all of it. It is the dehumanization that we must find a way to heal.
I am going to tell you a story of a song that was never sung. When I was at graduate school at Catholic University, I tried to be a serious playwright. And unfortunately, when you're in graduate school in theater, there are those who insist that you do something musical. So I avoided it for a long time until I was told that, well, perhaps I did not have the depth of talent to write a musical. So, of course, I wrote a musical, and it was titled Knocking Off Massa, a 3-act musical comedy about those carefree days of slavery. Now, Eric has given me good advice, so I'm going to synopsize 3 words, 3 sentences each act, the play itself. In Act 1, darkies are singing and dancing when Massa enters, threatening them with the whipping post. Jeb tells the darkies that they need a revolution like the one in Haiti. When asked how he knows about this, Jeb reveals he knows how to read, and he was unanimously elected leader of the revolution and left alone on stage to figure it out. Act 2, Massa, having discovered that Jarvis, his house darky, has been giving books to darkies and teaching them and encouraging them to read, has chained Jarvis to the whipping post and insisted all darkies, mammies, and pickaninnies assemble to see the punishment meted out. The darkies plead with Jeb to do something, so he grabs Lula, Massa's daughter, kisses her on the lips, and Massa drops dead to the ground. The act ends with a tap-dancing, singing jubilee to the song, Massa's lying on the cold, cold ground, but his wife ain't sticking around. Act 3, attracted to loud moaning and rattling chains, darkies go into the cotton field to find Massa's ghost in great sorrow. He explains that he was refused acceptance into heaven and is doomed to walk the cotton field until a darky sheds a tear for him. So he pleads with them, to no avail. A black minister, hearing of the situation, comes to the cotton field and has a service, and there is a sermon, and testifying, and spirituals, and a collection, and more spirituals. And while it is decided that no one will cry for him, it is their Christian duty to ease his suffering. So they decide to erect a tall stone statue of Massa in a Confederate uniform and adorn his chains with the stars and bars. And Massa, with grateful tears, sings the most plaintive version of Dixie as the lights dim on him and the voices of the darkies from the darkness sing the refrain as the play ends. People actually liked it, except for one song. They would not show it during the showcase productions. The song was titled Jeb's Lament, and it's sung at the end of Act 1 when Jeb starts to leave the stage and he stops and goes back to center stage and sings, breaking the fourth wall, directly to the audience. Alone now with an audience, there are things I'd like to do. A tragic line from Oedipus, or a pun by Girardot. But oh, too well I know your reactions I can gauge. For you folk, you want your darky singing barefoot on the stage. A duel with swords, passions unleashed, is that too much to ask? Just want a scene that tries to show the man beneath this mask. But I know that it would mean an entirely new age, for you folk just love your darky singing barefoot on the stage. At least a tender love scene, at that I could excel, to have someone I truly love fall beneath my spell. I could be so very tender with a lovely lass of beige, but you folk, you need your darky singing barefoot on the stage. The reactions were, that's rude, it's confrontational, it breaks the flow, and the one that pierced my heart from the professor that dared me to write this in the first place, you are not Mel Brooks, Spoon, you haven't earned the right. One of my best friends was working at a regional theater at the time, loved the script, including the song, and he also told me that there was no way in hell that his theater would produce it. When I asked him why, he said because they would lose 10 to 15% of their subscriber base, and that what I had to understand is that although audiences did enjoy their darkies singing barefoot on the stage, they would be highly offended to have it pointed out.
You are not Mel Brooks. You haven't earned the right. Reading that line reminded me of a line from the hip-hop artist Mos Def in his 1999 album Black on Both Sides. You can laugh and criticize Michael Jackson if you wanna. Woody Allen molested and married his stepdaughter. Some same press kicking dirt on Michael's name show Woody and Soon-Yi at the playoff games, holding hands. Sit back and just think about that. Would he get that type of dap if his name was Woody Black? In America and beyond, the race is omnipresent. Who has earned the right is mostly presumption and not merit. There aren't words for me to tell you how deeply it all breaks my heart. The author Anand Giridharadas, in research for his most recent book, speculated that after interviewing a large number of transracial adoptive families that this might be the kernel around which true racial healing in this country begins. And as a father in a transracial family, I knew what he meant. Because I know for all of you who are white, living in a white family, I can't find a way to teach you what I've learned. But I will keep struggling to do so.
Now, this is Black History Month, so I suspect you shall encounter lists of movies you must view this month, and upon most of those lists will be the film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Many of you know how I feel about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. However, I was speaking with a former student recently who disagrees rather vehemently with my opinion of the film, so she posed a question to me specifically. Mr. Spoon, are you saying that the United States Film Registry was wrong to include it as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant? I told her that it was absolutely right, and also that, quite frankly, it was daring and courageous at the time, and she was speechless. Give me my map. The film was one of the few at the time to depict an interracial marriage in a positive light. And it was complete, while it was being completed, they overturned the Supreme Court overturned Loving versus Virginia. Now, the reason that I have that map up there is because at the time before it was overturned, that entire red area were the states that did not permit interracial marriage. And the reason I say that it was an act of courage for the studio to actually continue with this is because in cold capitalist terms, if the Supreme Court had not overturned it, all that entire red area would have been states where the film would not have been distributed or distributed very sparsely. It happened with a lot of films, but those films also didn't have a payroll of Portier, Hepburn, and Tracy. Now, when I talk about my feelings about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, I want to put it into perspective for you. For those of you who have been on a dorm, lived in a campus, You know the joy you feel when people say, my folks are visiting and want to take us out to dinner. For me, my answer always was, yes, when, and how dressed up do I have to get? Then I realized that they started adding, and a movie. And after third time, I realized that the movie was always that movie, and I began to hide, especially when I realized that. And then they started leaving notes on top of my books. Even those whom I did not know very well, saying things like, Spoon, Jack, Mr. Levitt, fourth period biology 2 class, my folks and my grandma are coming to campus and they would love to take you to dinner and a movie. His grandma. Now I saw that movie over 20 times in a 1-year period in front of primarily white audiences whose primarily white members, unless I made an exit, came to me and talked about how wonderful the movie was and how wonderful it made them feel and how wonderful it was for racial progress in our country. And I responded, yes, it was indeed a wonderful movie. But nobody ever asked me what I thought about it, and very few ever bothered to ask me how it made me feel.
Until next time, thank you for joining us on The Pulpiteer. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can help others find it by liking and subscribing. If you're so moved, you can even leave us a review. All reviews will be gratefully received. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can make a donation at sangabrieluu.org/give. The Pulpiteer Podcast is a production of the San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Georgetown, Texas. The podcast is hosted by Spotify, and theme music is by John Faber. Our live recording tech crew is Frank Sanders, Rob Bertold, Keith Hutchinson, and Andrea McDaniel. The podcast is produced and performed by Eric Hepburn.